In your mind, you see yourself gently rocking in a chair, watching the sun dip behind the Blue Ridge Mountains, or sinking your feet into the warm sand along the Atlantic shoreline, convinced you finally cracked the code and found an affordable slice of paradise. But that fantasy tends to fall apart pretty fast once it hits reality. Like realizing you've just committed to a 30-year mortgage in a town where crime rates are climbing and economic growth is practically non-existent. We're about to take a closer, more honest look at 10 cities in the Carolinas where buyer's remorse isn't just occasional. It's become a daily reality for plenty of frustrated homeowners. These are the kinds of places where for sale signs seem to multiply overnight, as more people come to terms with the fact that low property taxes don't mean much if you don't feel safe checking your mail after dark. You'll want to stay tuned, because we're also going to uncover a well-known beach destination that, despite its reputation, struggles with serious theft issues. And at the very top of the list is a city that repeatedly shows up as one of the most dangerous places anywhere in the United States. Before we get into it, go ahead and subscribe to the channel, leave a comment if you've ever lived in either of the Carolinas, and share this with anyone considering a move down south. Alright, let's get started and take a drive through the places where that dream lifestyle can quickly turn into a dead end. Number 10 takes us to Asheville. You might imagine Asheville as the ultimate mountain escape with a hipster vibe, packed with craft breweries, quirky art spaces, and street corners where someone's always strumming a banjo. It's basically the face of tourism in North Carolina, the place that shows up in every travel ad. But for people who actually try to put down roots here, the day-to-day reality can feel more like a financial strain that never really lets up. The main reason people end up leaving comes down to one thing. The cost of living is wildly out of sync with what locals actually earn. Housing prices, in particular, have been driven up by out-of-state buyers and the explosion of short-term rentals, with median home prices hovering around the $500,000 mark. That might not seem outrageous if you're relocating from somewhere like California, but when local wages, especially in the service industry, haven't kept pace, it creates a serious imbalance. And it's not just about affording a home. The city itself is struggling to keep up with its own growth, and the infrastructure just isn't built to handle the influx of new residents and tourists. On top of that, homelessness has risen noticeably in recent years, with official counts showing a steady increase in people living without shelter. That shift has changed the atmosphere downtown, which used to feel much more relaxed and carefree. Many residents also point to a rise in property crime, and the data supports those concerns. Statistically, your odds of experiencing property crime here are surprisingly high for a place that promotes itself as a peaceful mountain getaway. Picture this. You invest close to $500,000 in a charming bungalow, expecting tranquility, only to find yourself stuck in constant traffic on tight, winding roads that were never meant to handle this kind of volume. Getting around becomes frustrating fast, since the city's mountainous terrain makes it difficult to expand or improve roadways in any meaningful way. Meanwhile, everyday expenses, like groceries and utility bills, tend to run higher than the national average, adding even more pressure to an already stretched budget. Sure, it's an incredible spot for a weekend trip, no question about it. But living there full-time means dealing with rapid gentrification that has chipped away at the character longtime residents once cherished. At some point, it starts to feel like you're paying premium prices for a place whose infrastructure is buckling under the demands of tourism. And that's often the moment when homeowners decide it's time to put up a for sale sign and move on. Number 9 brings us to Columbia, the capital of South Carolina. It's widely known for its intense heat, so thick and humid that for about half the year, stepping outside can feel like wading through a bowl of steaming soup. But while you can't do much about the weather, the climate isn't the main reason people are rethinking their move here. Columbia promotes itself as a lively college town and a center for government activity, which on the surface sounds appealing. However, beneath that image lies a city dealing with some pretty serious public safety concerns. According to data from the Federal Bureau of Investigation, Columbia regularly posts violent crime rates that are high for a city of its size. In fact, those numbers often come in well above the national average, something that's hard to ignore after signing a long-term mortgage. The economy doesn't offer much reassurance either. While the presence of University of South Carolina helps provide jobs, a significant portion of the population is still struggling financially. Data from the United States Census Bureau shows that roughly 24% of residents live below the poverty line. That means nearly 1 in 4 people are facing economic hardship, which creates a noticeable divide across the city. You might pass through a well-kept, historic neighborhood, only to find yourself just a few blocks later in an area dealing with visible neglect and urban decay. This uneven economic landscape makes real estate a bit of a gamble. Instead of steady appreciation, property values can fluctuate depending on the neighborhood, leaving homeowners uncertain about long-term returns. Then there's the infrastructure, which locals often criticize. Roads throughout the city are known for being in rough shape, with potholes that can do real damage to your car over time. And while South Carolina is known for relatively low property taxes, that doesn't mean you're off the hook financially. Sales taxes and additional local fees in Richland County can quietly pile up, cutting into the extra income you expected to have. For families, the school system is another sticking point. Ratings for many inner-city schools tend to fall short, pushing parents toward private education or forcing them to relocate to suburban areas, undermining the whole idea of living in the city to begin with. When you put it all together, the relentless heat, uneven economic conditions, and a higher-than-average risk of violent crime, it becomes pretty clear why some residents decide to leave the capital behind and look elsewhere. Number 8 is Greensboro, a place that's often marketed as the budget-friendly alternative to bigger cities like Charlotte or Raleigh. The pitch usually sounds appealing. You get more space and value for your money while still being centrally located in the state. And yes, on paper, housing does look more affordable, with median prices sitting somewhere around $300,000. But that lower price tag comes with a few important trade-offs that don't always show up in the listing description. For one, Greensboro has been going through something of an identity shift for years, moving away from its roots as a manufacturing hub toward a logistics-based economy. That kind of transition doesn't happen cleanly, and the effects are still visible across the city. The recovery hasn't been evenly distributed either. Some neighborhoods are doing just fine, while others are still dealing with poverty rates above 20%, which tends to create cycles of stagnation. In those areas, property values struggle to grow, and new businesses are often hesitant to invest. What really makes potential buyers hesitate, though, is the crime situation. This isn't just about perception, it's backed by actual data. Reports from the Greensboro Police Department show ongoing issues with crimes like aggravated assault and burglary. When you compare Greensboro to cities of a similar size, its crime rates stand out as being noticeably higher than the national average. That's the kind of detail that can completely change how affordable a home really feels. Picture moving into what seems like a great deal, only to realize later that your car insurance has jumped significantly because the area is considered high risk for vehicle theft. Those are the hidden costs that rarely come up during a showing. Then there's the layout of the city itself. Greensboro is pretty spread out, which means you'll likely be driving almost everywhere you go. Public transit options are limited, so having a car isn't optional, it's essential. And as the city continues to function as part of the broader Triad region, traffic has been steadily getting worse, especially for commuters. The job market can also feel a bit slow, especially when you compare it to the rapid growth happening in Raleigh's tech scene. Data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics shows that wage growth in the Greensboro High Point area has often trailed behind nearby regions. So while you might be drawn in by the lower home prices, that advantage can fade if your income doesn't keep up and everyday expenses continue to rise. In the end, Greensboro has this lingering sense of being on the verge of something bigger, but never quite getting there. And for many homeowners, the wait for meaningful change eventually wears thin. Number 7 is Spartanburg. Locals like to call it Sparkle City, but for a lot of newcomers, that shine wears off pretty quickly once they're fully moved in and settled. The city has been working to reinvent itself, bringing in manufacturing opportunities, especially with major employers like BMW operating nearby. Still, despite those efforts, the core of the city continues to struggle with long-standing issues that push many residents toward the suburbs or out of the state altogether. One of the biggest reasons people regret buying here comes down to crime, and it's not a small concern. The numbers are hard to ignore. Data from Neighborhood Scout shows that Spartanburg is safer than only a tiny fraction of cities across the United States. To put that into perspective, it means the overwhelming majority of cities in the country are considered safer than this one. The violent crime rate is especially concerning, ranking among the highest in South Carolina. Statistically, The odds of becoming a victim of violent crime are far from reassuring. Definitely not something most people are comfortable with, especially those raising families. That kind of environment changes how people live day to day. Simple things, like walking around downtown at night or letting kids play outside unsupervised, start to feel risky instead of routine. Safety isn't the only issue either. Schools within the city limits often face challenges with funding and performance, which leads many families to look outside the city for better options. As a result, demand shifts toward county schools, leaving parts of the inner-city housing market struggling. From an economic standpoint, the picture is mixed. While there are jobs in the broader region, the city itself deals with a relatively high poverty rate, hovering in the low 20s percentage-wise, according to the United States Census Bureau. You can actually see that economic strain in certain areas, where empty storefronts and aging, neglected homes sit just blocks away from newer redevelopment projects. The contrast can feel pretty stark. It creates a strange situation where you might invest in a beautifully restored historic home, but if neighboring properties are abandoned or attracting unwanted activity, your home's value doesn't have much room to grow. There are also environmental concerns to consider. The region has dealt with air quality issues in the past due to industrial activity. While conditions have improved over time, it's still something that some residents remain sensitive to. When you start to feel like you always need to stay alert just to feel safe, the charm that initially drew you in tends to lose its appeal. And for many people, that's the point where they decide it's time to move on. Number 6 is Gastonia. If you've spent any time online looking at North Carolina content, chances are you've come across a few jokes at Gastonia's expense. Around Charlotte, it's practically become a running punchline, but for the people who actually live there, the issues behind those jokes are anything but funny. Sitting just west of Charlotte, Gastonia is often marketed as a commuter-friendly option where you can afford a much larger home without paying big city prices. But that lower cost tends to come with trade-offs that don't show up in the listing photos. The city has long had a reputation for being a bit rough, and unfortunately, the data doesn't do much to challenge that perception. Property crime is one of the biggest concerns. According to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, incidents like burglary, larceny, and car theft happen here at rates well above the North Carolina average. So while you might move into a brand new house in a quiet-looking subdivision, it doesn't take long before you're scrolling through the neighborhood group and seeing constant reports of car break-ins or packages disappearing from porches. That kind of environment can make you feel on edge in your own home, which takes away a lot of the enjoyment you expected when you bought the place. Beyond safety concerns, the overall layout of Gastonia doesn't do it many favors. It's a classic example of suburban sprawl, endless stretches of strip malls, fast food spots, and wide roads with very little in the way of character or cultural identity. You might find yourself stuck in traffic along Franklin Boulevard, surrounded by concrete and chain stores, wondering what exactly drew you there in the first place. Economically, the situation is a bit uneven as well. While there has been some growth, the median household income still falls below the state average, and the poverty rate sits around the mid-teens percentage-wise. That kind of economic reality affects everything from the quality of local amenities to how much funding is available for public improvements. Gastonia also deals with some of the downsides of being so close to Charlotte. It absorbs some of the spillover challenges from the larger city, but doesn't have the same level of resources to address them effectively. As a result, many residents feel like they're essentially living in an extension of Charlotte's workforce zone, without getting to enjoy the benefits that come with actually living in the city. What you often see is a revolving door effect. People move in for an affordable starter home, realize the lifestyle compromises aren't worth it, and then move out as soon as they're able to build enough equity to leave. Number 5 is Myrtle Beach, and this one tends to catch people off guard because it's widely seen as the go-to vacation hotspot. Most people picture it as the perfect coastal escape, but actually living there year-round is a very different experience. The Grand Strand is great for a summer getaway, especially for a week or two, but turning that vacation vibe into everyday life can come with some serious downsides. One of the biggest issues is how heavily the local economy relies on tourism. Because of that, most available jobs are tied to the service industry, and they don't typically pay very well. If you're not working in restaurants, hotels, or seasonal businesses, finding a stable, higher-paying career can be a real challenge. That kind of job market creates a revolving door population where people are constantly moving in and out, making it tough to build lasting relationships or a strong sense of community. But the main reason many homeowners end up leaving comes down to crime. Myrtle Beach regularly ranks among the more dangerous cities in the state, and the numbers reflect that reality. With huge waves of tourists coming through, especially during peak seasons, opportunistic crimes tend to spike. Recent data shows that the overall crime rate is extremely high, well above what you'd expect for a city of its size. That includes everything from minor theft to more serious incidents, with activity often increasing during the busiest times of the year. Then there's the traffic. When crowds flood the area every summer, getting around becomes a headache. Even simple errands can take far longer than they should, especially along major routes like US Route 17, which can feel like a parking lot. Another factor many buyers don't think about is the impact of the coastal environment. The salty air can be rough on property and vehicles, speeding up wear and tear on things like HVAC systems and car exteriors. Insurance costs are another big surprise. Because of the risk of hurricanes and flooding, premiums can be extremely high. What might look like an affordable condo at first glance can quickly become expensive once you factor in HOA dues, specialized insurance, and maintenance costs. And then there's the reputation, often referred to as Dirty Myrtle, which didn't come out of nowhere. After the initial excitement of living by the ocean fades, some residents find themselves in a place that feels overly crowded, a bit worn down, and less safe than expected. It's no surprise that many retirees who move here for the beach lifestyle end up heading inland after a few years, looking for something quieter and more stable. Number 4 is Fayetteville. You might recognize it as the home of Fort Liberty, a place with a long and proud military background. But while that history gives the city a certain identity, many civilians who move into the housing market end up feeling a different kind of reality. You might arrive expecting a close-knit, patriotic community, but what you often find instead is a constant cycle of people coming and going. With so many residents tied to military assignments, neighbors rotate in and out so quickly that it's hard to build any lasting connections. That kind of turnover makes it difficult for a strong community atmosphere to take hold. Still, the biggest issue pushing people out isn't just the lack of stability, it's the reputation the city can't seem to shake. The nickname Fayetteville continues to circulate, and unfortunately, the crime data doesn't do much to disprove it. In many parts of the city, feeling truly safe can seem like a luxury rather than the norm. Statistics from Neighborhood Scout suggest that the chances of becoming a victim of violent crime are high enough to make people think twice about their surroundings on a daily basis. And it doesn't stop there. Property crime is also a major concern, with incidents like break-ins and theft happening often enough to keep residents on edge. It's not hard to imagine moving into what seems like a decent starter home near the base, only to find yourself repeatedly dealing with vandalism or theft, sometimes more than once in a single year. Local law enforcement is actively working to manage the situation, but the sheer number of incidents can make it feel like an uphill battle. From an economic perspective, the city can feel stuck in neutral. While the military provides a level of stability for some households, the broader population still faces challenges. Data from the United States Census Bureau puts the poverty rate in the high teens percentage-wise. That gap shows up in the commercial areas, where you're more likely to see payday lenders, pawn shops, and fast food chains than the kind of higher-end businesses many newcomers expect. Education is another concern for families. School ratings across much of the area tend to be below average, which often leads parents to consider private schooling, an added expense they may not have planned for. After a while, it can start to feel like you're investing in a place that doesn't quite offer long-term stability. For many residents, Fayetteville ends up feeling more like a temporary stop than a place to truly settle down, and that's often what leads them to eventually move on. Number 3 is Rocky Mount. At first glance, it can look like you've stumbled onto an incredible deal, maybe even a charming old Victorian home priced so low it feels like a steal. But there's usually a reason prices are that low, and in this case, it's not a small one. Rocky Mount has become a clear example of what happens to a town after major industries disappear. Once supported by textile and tobacco jobs, the local economy took a major hit, and recovery has been slow to non-existent. The financial strain is evident across the community. According to the United States Census Bureau, the poverty rate sits at around 25%, meaning a significant portion of residents are struggling to get by. That level of hardship creates an atmosphere you can feel almost immediately. a sense that the town is under pressure in ways that go beyond just economics. Still, what really drives people away isn't just the lack of opportunity. It's the level of violence. Rocky Mount has built a reputation that even longtime locals acknowledge, and it's not a comforting one. Data from the Federal Bureau of Investigation shows that violent crime rates here are more than double the national average. For a city of its size, that's a serious concern. The intensity of crime can feel more in line with much larger urban areas, which catches many newcomers off guard. It's the kind of place where hearing loud noises at night might make you stop and wonder whether it's something harmless or something much more serious. That realization alone can be enough to shake your sense of security. And if you start thinking about leaving, the housing market doesn't make it easy. Because of the city's reputation, demand is limited, and property values have struggled to grow. In some neighborhoods, prices have even declined, making resale a challenge. Data from Zillow suggests the market here remains sluggish compared to other parts of the state. There's also a noticeable divide between different areas of the city, but that separation doesn't necessarily shield you from broader issues, as crime tends to spill across boundaries. At a certain point, it becomes clear that cosmetic upgrades and renovations can only do so much. You may have purchased a home at an unbelievably low price, but the trade-off often comes in the form of limited job prospects and an ongoing sense of unease. Number 2 is North Charleston. And don't let the name trick you into thinking it's just an extension of the historic charm you find in downtown Charleston. It's a completely different environment, and honestly, a much tougher one to live in. On paper, North Charleston is an important industrial center, with shipping, manufacturing, and logistics playing a huge role in its economy. But it also carries a reputation for being one of the most dangerous cities in the state. A lot of buyers get pulled in by the lower home prices, thinking they've figured out a way to live near the coast without paying coastal prices. But the day-to-day experience often feels very different from what they expected. Crime is one of the biggest concerns. Data from Neighborhood Scout shows that North Charleston ranks as safer than only a tiny fraction of cities in the United States. In other words, the vast majority of places in the country have lower crime levels. The combined risk of violent and property crime is high enough that residents often feel on edge, with estimates suggesting about a 1 in 18 chance of becoming a victim. That kind of statistic isn't something most people are comfortable building a long-term life around. In practical terms, that means police activity is a regular part of the landscape, sometimes feeling just as common as street traffic itself. Beyond safety, the overall living environment is heavily shaped by industry. The city sits near busy ports, rail lines, and large manufacturing facilities, which brings constant noise and ongoing concerns about air quality for some residents. Traffic is another major frustration. Because North Charleston serves as a key route for commuters heading into Charleston proper, major roads are often backed up for long stretches of the day. Interstate 26, in particular, can turn into a slow-moving parking lot, with people spending a significant portion of their day just trying to get a few miles down the road. Economically, there are also challenges. With a poverty rate around the high teens percentage-wise, some neighborhoods show clear signs of neglect and uneven development. That creates situations where newly renovated homes might sit right next to boarded-up properties or areas struggling with ongoing issues, which naturally affects how stable an investment feels. In the end, North Charleston can feel like a trade-off that doesn't quite balance out. The promise of coastal living at a lower cost comes with industrial stress, congestion, and safety concerns that many people find difficult to ignore long-term. As a result, plenty of newcomers end up treating it as a temporary stop rather than a place to settle permanently. Number 1 takes us to Lumberton, and this is where the list really reaches its lowest point. If someone actually bought a home here, it's safe to say they'd probably need a moment of sympathy. Lumberton is often described as one of the most difficult places to live in the Carolinas, and for many homeowners, the regret can set in almost immediately after moving in. What pushes it to the top of this list is a combination of extremely high crime levels and ongoing environmental challenges that together create a very harsh living situation. Starting with crime, the situation is serious. Data analyzed by the Federal Bureau of Investigation shows violent crime rates that consistently rank well above the national average, often placing the city among the most dangerous in North Carolina. Locals sometimes refer to the area as Lumtown, and while that nickname might be used jokingly, it doesn't feel very funny for people actually dealing with the conditions on the ground. According to Neighborhood Scout, the risk of property crime is roughly 1 in 20, while violent crime sits around 1 in 50. Those are extremely high odds compared to most places in the country, and they shape how people go about their daily lives. But the challenges don't stop with safety. Economically, Lumberton is deeply struggling. The poverty rate is close to 30%, based on figures from the United States Census Bureau, meaning nearly a third of residents are living in poverty. That level of economic hardship leaves very little room for investment in things like schools, roads, and basic infrastructure, which only adds to the long-term difficulties. Then there's the environmental factor. The city sits in a low-lying area that has been heavily impacted by major hurricanes, including storms like Matthew and Florence. Entire neighborhoods have experienced severe flooding, and recovery has been slow and difficult. Because of that risk, flood insurance can become extremely expensive, sometimes close to what a mortgage payment would be, or in some cases, coverage can be hard to obtain at all. This uncertainty has also affected the housing market itself. Many homeowners hesitate to make improvements or long-term investments, worried that future flooding could undo everything. When you combine limited job opportunities, high crime rates, and the constant threat of flooding, it creates a situation where daily life can feel unstable and stressful. For many residents, it starts to feel less like a place to build a future and more like a constant struggle to stay afloat. And that's why Lumberton often ends up at the top of discussions about buyer's remorse in the Carolinas. It represents the extreme end of multiple overlapping challenges. That wraps up the journey through these cities. The South might sound appealing from the outside, but as this list shows, the reality in some places can be far more complicated than the postcards suggest.